Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Deanna Helscher, and I am the Regional Dean at the UT Health Houston School of Public Health in Austin and Director of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. Our center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world, with a mission to advance health and healthy living for children and families through research, community-based programs, and dissemination of evidence-based practices. And a good example of that is this webinar and the information we're going to share about infant formulas. So next slide. We have a lot of resources on our center webpage, msdcenter.org. So please consult that website. Make sure you bookmark it. And we have a lot of other webinars that are archived there, as well as other projects that are ongoing. So I'm happy to say with the next slide that this is approved for nursing contact hours. So this webinar provides 1 contact hour of nursing professional development. So Cizik School of Nursing at UT Health is accredited as a provider of these nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. And so requirements for completion are attending this session and then completing an online evaluation form. And so we'll give you a QR code for that at the end. This is also approved for 1 continuing education hour for a registered dietitian nutritionist and for CHESS credits. Next slide. Neither the planning committee members nor the presenters today have disclosed any relevant financial relationships related to the planning or implementation of this CNE activity. So we have no conflicts of interest to disclose to you. And so with that, I would like to introduce you all to Dr. Stephen Abrams. So Dr. Abrams is a professor of pediatrics and interim assistant dean of admissions at Dell Medical School at University of Texas at Austin. He's a board certified neonatologist and is trained at many institutions, including MIT, the Ohio State College of Medicine, the NIH, and Baylor College of Medicine. So he's internationally recognized for his work in pediatric and neonatal nutrition with research focused on mineral requirements, particularly calcium, zinc, and iron in infants and children. So he served on 2 U.S. dietary guidelines advisory committees. So he's one of a very few people who have been on more than one. And he's held leadership roles with American Academy of Pediatrics and is editor-in-chief of Advances in Nutrition. And not only that, he's been awarded several honors, such as the Samuel J. Foman Nutrition Award and induction into the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering's College of Fellows. He really has had a distinguished career, and we're so fortunate to have him here with us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Abrams.
Well, hello, everyone. And first of all, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm sure they'll let me know if you have any trouble. We're going to have some fun today, I hope, and going to talk to you about the amazing world of infant formula and all the things that are going on. The reason and the way I got involved in all this is that I've been interested in infant nutrition for many years. And recently, especially with the shortages 3 years ago, which I'm not mostly going to discuss, became a hot topic again and now has spiked up again this year, as we'll talk about. So what are we going to try to accomplish today? We're going to recognize some of the marketing and regulatory issues related to infant formulas and the effect of Operation Stork Speed on them. Discuss the challenges involved in safe production and use and regulation of formulas in the United States. Talk about some newer infant feeding products and infant formulas that are entering the market, and talk about the pathway for the introduction of novel formulas in the U.S. market for full-term infants. We're not going to be talking about premature infants generally today. Next slide, please. So first, let me give you a little background before we talk about details of formulas, which we will, about how formulas are evaluated by the FDA for approval, or they don't technically use the word approval, they use the term registration in the United States. Although there are a lot of guidances and rules involved, there are two basic processes that need to be done in order to get a new type of formula or a major change in a formula registered with the FDA in the United States. The first is a clinical study on babies called a growth monitoring study, and the second is an animal study. So we're going to talk about each one in a little bit of detail. So a growth monitoring study is a short-term study, usually 4 to 6 months. They don't include preterm infants, including late preterm infants. The comparison standard for growth in a new study is currently marketed for formulas. It's not human milk. They include some evaluation of adverse effects, but that's not necessarily the primary thing that goes on. Although they are looking overall at safety, where growth is considered to be a safety measure, not necessarily particular immunological or other types of benefits of a new formula. Currently, formulas are going to be registered with the FDA also have to undergo an animal study, commonly called the PER. This is a historical test that's used to evaluate growth based on the protein source using laboratory rats. As we'll talk about, this approach is inaccurate. It's not, rats are not people, and other countries generally do not use this approach. It's an approach that's a historical one that, as we'll talk about, needs to be abandoned. And it's a broad-based kind of approach, but there are better ways to do this. Next slide. So what are some of the limitations in this approach as we look at talking about newer formulas and changing the guidances? So there's virtually no data about cost benefit. That is a new formula or a novel protein or whatever in a formula going to be expensive, and how it will affect the WIC program, etc. There's very little data on the interaction of the bioactives that are often being added to formulas. The information that comes out of this entire evaluation process is almost never presented in a fashion that's useful to consumers, pediatricians, nurses, dietitians, even a lot of other people. It tends to be very technically presented. People want to know what are the benefits of a new formula, why should I spend money on it and buy it and use it for my babies, and that type of information is rarely presented by the companies of the FDA in a useful form for those who are going to use it. People might be interested in meaningful clinical outcomes such as allergy, colic, et cetera, and these are typically not actually evaluated. Just growth is really the only thing that's evaluated in most of these studies. Next slide, please. There are some other study design issues for the clinical studies that makes it very difficult to get these studies conducted. The reason I'm telling you all this is as we talk about Operation Stork Speed and resolving things, the goal is not only to resolve or improve the nutrient guidance, which we'll talk about in a few minutes in great detail, but also figure out the regulatory processes, which are problematic. So what are some of the problematic aspects? Well, first of all, the currently mandated FDA study design requires enrollment of a baby by 14 days of age, and when they have to be drinking or consuming only formula and no longer being breastfed at all. That's a difficult standard because many babies are breastfed for a period of time before they switch over to formula. In order to complete the study, the FDA mandates 6 study visits with over 15 weeks, which is excessive and difficult to do. As I mentioned, the rules require a concurrent formula group to be studied, but they don't require a breastfed control group, which is problematic, as I'll talk about it a little more in here in a minute. Although they require 6 data points in 15 weeks, the use of those intermediate time points is not very clear. In ultimately evaluating whether or not the product is successful, they look at whether or not the comparison is the new formula achieves a growth rate within 3 grams per day of the currently marketed formula, that's the control group. This is problematic on all sorts of grounds, not the least of which is that 3 grams per day is literally an arbitrary number. Even more relevant to that is the fact that the difference between formula and breastfed babies is often more than 3 grams per day. What that means is the baby on a formula that grows at the rate of a breastfed baby may not meet the standards for being a registerable formula, which is problematic. They do mandate that the growth curve be compared with the WHO curves, but it's not clear how those data are used. And some of the use of safety data is a little bit less certain. Next slide, please. So this is where that 3 grams comes from. It basically comes from an article that was published by the AAP Committee on Nutrition about 37 years ago. And again, it was based entirely on the differences between growth of formula-fed and breastfed babies. But ultimately, what it does is it supports the idea that babies should grow faster than a breastfed control group baby would grow. Next slide, please. So after the formula shortages of 2022, the U.S. government, the Congress mandated that the FDA contract with the national academies to do a couple of different reports on the formula industry. One related specifically to the shortages, and it was published in last year, and I'm not going to specifically discuss that, although it's got a lot of interesting material in it. The second was about these studies I just talked about. Now, I'm going to go through with you a little bit about what the NASRM report said. It was just released a couple months ago. Next slide, please. So first thing they said is that PER test, the protein efficiency ratio test, shouldn't be used. Okay? And again, I said virtually no other country in the world uses it. It's expensive, it's difficult to do, and doesn't provide the type of information about protein quality that we would like to produce. It simply isn't useful, especially as we look at novel, like vegan type of formulas that might come on the marketplace. The general recommendation and what's used in most countries is to evaluate the amino acid pattern in the babies as a reference to determine the protein quality of infant formula. There are other in vitro digestion methods. There are a variety of different ways that one can assess protein, but using rats isn't the right way to do it. And the National Academy report stated that pretty clearly. Next slide, please. With regard to clinical studies, basically what this kind of long kind of spiel from the National Academy says is that basically they need to relook at the growth standard studies and look at how it relates to human milk and look at whether or not the issues involved actually involved growth, and of course whether or not that 3 grams per day is a useful marker. Bottom line is the recommendations here, and so I'll come up a little more, basically say that the standard growth study, which has largely been in place for over 30 years, is not providing all that much information relative to the amount of cost and effort that it takes. Again, the problem is that we want formulas on the market to be safe. We want them to help babies and be safe for babies, but we don't want the process by which they get registered with the FDA to be so onerous as it was for many years that we simply cannot get new formulas onto the marketplace because it's virtually impossible for companies to get them through the regulatory processes. Next slide. One of the quirks of the current rules is that every formula that's tested as a new formula has to be compared with a currently marketed formula in a randomized controlled trial. But the currently marketed formulas have now been tested in study after study after study. All that design means is it doubles the cost and the number of babies involved. After all, the growth rate on a routine formula is well known. It's well published, and we actually should be comparing against the WHO curves anyway. So the question, so NASA basically suggested, do we really need a full or a control group in these types of studies? Can't we simply look at the growth rate compared to historical data for that formula and healthy babies and against the WHO growth curve to ensure the growth is adequate? Next slide, please. Let's now begin our process of looking a little bit at the details of nutrients and formulas. Now, the guidance for the nutrient intakes in infant formula were largely set based on the Infant Formula Act of 1980 by Congress. Now, why did Congress set the nutrient requirements for infant formulas? The answer is straightforward. In 1977, 78, 79, there was a tremendous amount of concern about salt intake and salt intake being harmful. So one of the formula companies in particular got the clever idea of taking out virtually all the sodium chloride, all the salt infant formula. And the result was what you would imagine. A lot of babies became severely hypernatremic, hyperkalemic, and did very badly on a long-term basis. That prompted Congress to say, well, we need to regulate them. So based largely on historical data that had been accumulated by the American Academy of Pediatrics and other groups, in 1980, Congress passed a set of regulations. Now you would think that those for what should be in formula. Since 1980, only a couple of very small changes have been made in those guidance. Literally, the guidance we use now is virtually exactly the guidance from 1980. And as you can imagine, there's been a little science since 1980. So let's begin to work our way through that. Let's begin with some topics we're going to cover in more detail and some in less detail. One I'm not going to cover in too much detail, but I did want to mention here is protein. Largely, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because most of the controversy has been about carbohydrates and lipids, not about protein. But I do want to point out issues about protein. Now, there are a variety of standards that are listed here. Codex is basically the World Health Organization's guidance for the nutrient content of formulas. US is obvious. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, which largely comes close to following US guidance from Health Canada, and the EU is a group called EFSA, European Food Safety Agency, which sets standards for Europe. If we look at calories as the energy density of infant formula, you can see that the United States has no guidance. So everyone thinks that all formulas have to have a certain energy density. That is not the case. In fact, individual nutrients are guided, but not the ultimate energy density. So that's a problem. What the other problem is that the protein guidance for the United States is a maximal level that's exceptionally high. If you take a look at both Codex and EU maximum, you can see that the maximum allowed in the United States is very high. And even the minimum level is well above the level in breast milk. So that's a problem that needs to be fixed. Most formulas don't go anywhere near that maximum for routine formulas, but nonetheless, while if we're going to fix the regulations, we need to fix the maximum and put it more in line with either Codex or the European Union guidance. Next slide, please. But all of that is minor because the real war and the battle in the public media and everywhere else has been about fat and carbohydrates. So we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about carbohydrates and fats and what are some of the issues about them. So let's give you a little high-level overview first. Lactose, which is the carbohydrate in human milk and breast milk, is used in virtually all European formulas, even those that have partial protein hydrolysates. Per EU guidance, that is, the EU doesn't allow you to get rid of the lactose except in medical formulas. In terms of fat sources, some formulas use whole milk fat and some use skim milk. Seed oils, which we'll talk about, are used in every formula throughout the world. In the United States, there's no regulation that requires DHA or ARA in infant formula, although to the very best of my knowledge, every currently marketed U.S. registered formula contains them, but it's not mandated. And the last formula that did not contain DHA was just removed from the marketplace for marketing reasons, not because of that reason, within the last year. Next slide, please. So let's dig deeper a little bit on the carbohydrate source. The question is, if lactose is the natural sugar for breastfed babies, should we, and what are the consequences of changing to a non-primary lactose source or reducing the level of lactose? Now, first, I'm going to give you a little medical background on this. We do have babies who do not tolerate the lactose as babies. They have lactase deficiency. The incidence of that condition is on the order of 1 in 50 to 1 in 100,000. Okay? We also have some babies who have severe diarrhea that may benefit from a lactose-reduced formula, but that's a special medical use. It's not routine. Now, if we say, therefore, that 1 in 5,000, 10,000, whatever babies might have a medical benefit from a carbohydrate-reduced formula, we can ask what percentage of the population or what percentage of the formula sold is carbohydrate or is lactose-reduced. And the answer, shockingly, is somewhere between 40 and 60%. Okay, so it's a huge number, probably exceeds by about 10 billion% the number that actually needs such a formula medically. So the question is it harmful? And then why do they do it? So let's talk about is it harmful, and then what can be done about it. There are a number of studies that have looked at that. There are some studies that look at issues of food enjoyment, microbiome, etc. But the real interest has been whether or not replacing lactose with glucose sources such as corn syrup solid, not high fructose corn syrup, that's not in formula, um, leads to a different insulin response and excessive weight gain. And that's the question that's been debated and discussed. Next slide. A single study by Michael Gorin's group that was published a couple of years ago looked at a population of infants in the WIC program who are Hispanic in California and suggested an increased rate of weight gain and obesity at 2 years of age in those who were fed a lactose-reduced formula. Now, this type of epidemiological data is challenging to interpret and needs to be looked at closely. Nonetheless, we recognize that Europe does not routinely allow lactose-reduced formulas. There's no conceivable benefit for a lactose-reduced formula in over 99.99% of babies, including the half or so of all babies that get one. And so the question is what to do about it, and we'll come back to that. Next slide. So again, this kind of summarizes what I just told you about. The question becomes, why are we having the population use this? And why has it become almost half of the market? The answer is that the formulas are being marketed, they're low lactose in the United States, with names that confuse the population and would confuse individuals to believe that there's a health benefit. Now, I'm not going to name specific companies, but you'll see words that imply a benefit, words such as comfort and sensitive and gentle and all sorts of words used in marketing. Now, I'm not going to go through the code of marketing of infant formula in the United States by the World Health Organization. I think there's a lot of questions whether or not that type of marketing falls within the code. And the U.S., of course, is the only country in the world that's not signatory to the code. So we don't have a good rules in place to keep people from marketing formulas using those names which appeal to people, but don't actually provide any evidence whatsoever for a health benefit of the low lactose contained formula in the overwhelming majority of babies. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to figure out what to do about this, however. Next slide. But that's nothing compared to the controversy about seed oils. The world has rotated around seed oils. So first, a little bit about seed oils and infant formulas. So seed oils are in infant formulas and they provide the essential fatty acids, linoleic acid, that are necessary in the proper ratios for babies. There are formulas designed for toddlers. They're not infant formulas that may not have them, but they'll use things like coconut oil and palm oil in place of them. Or coconut oil and palm oil are fruit and vegetable oils. They're not true seed oils. Some formulas recently in particular have used more whole milk fat. Using whole milk fat as opposed to skim milk decreases the amount of seed oils that are needed, but by no means removes the majority of it. All of this is deflection and confusion, and has nothing to do with the country or origin or the quality or safety of an infant formula. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that seed oils are harmful in infant formulas, and they've been used in them for not less than about 60 to 70 years. Next slide, please. So part of it is there's a lot of confusion in the way this is presented publicly. So people are saying things like, and this is a widely distributed comment on social media that's everywhere. Okay, you'll find them everywhere. You'll find that they're horrible. They're wrecking our health. So I asked Dr. Grock whether or not, in fact, palm oil is a seed oil. I asked Dr. Grock a month ago, and it told me it was a seed oil. But I asked it the other day, and it got it right this time. So in any case, people are getting their information from social media, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. Sometimes AI gets it right, sometimes AI gets it wrong. So we all need to be educating people and not just using terms that sound horrible. Oh my gosh, babies are getting seed oil, without recognizing that there's no evidence for any harm. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about DHA and ARA in particular. So DHA is not a required ingredient in U.S. formulas, but as I said, it's found in almost all currently marketed ones. And to the best of my knowledge as of today, every FDA-registered infant formula sold in the United States, it does have DHA in it. There are controversies about the amount of DHA in formula. Some companies put in more, some companies put in less, because although the FDA through the GRAS process allows it a pretty broad range of levels. The levels found in some U.S. formulas are well below that set by the European Commission. Who's right is controversial, to say the least. I tend to support the European view of higher levels of DHA, but that's not settled science. And DHA should always be given an appropriate ratio with ARA to ensure adequate growth. European formulas will often use fish oil as a source of DHA. In the U.S., it's mostly algal sources. It's not clear which is safer and better. Probably doesn't matter very much, as the mercury contamination that fish oil used in infant formulas is negligible. So this becomes an issue. So if it's in the formulas, why does it need to be regulated? Again, because somebody could put out a formula without it in there. And if we're going to have guidance for what should be in formula, DHA should be mandated to be in formula. Next slide, please. Other nutrient issues. So this slide, which is more for your reference, shows that there's pretty broad ranges. For example, for calcium and phosphorus, there's no maximum level of these in the United States or in Codex, but there is in EU. I think the United States should generally accept the EU standards for the maximum levels. Same thing's true for magnesium. Iron is the one, though, I want to focus on. Iron is the most important of the mineral issues. And here what we see is a huge difference between the U.S. and the European standards, especially at the higher end. The high end of U.S. permitted level is much, much higher than what's used in the EU. Not only that, but the level of iron that's in most, not all, but most U.S. formulas is above the maximum level legally usable in infant formulas in Europe. So somebody's right and somebody's wrong. There's a very long history to this issue. Next slide, please. So part of it relates to the fact that we don't stage formulas in the United States. In most of the world, including in Europe, formulas are staged. So ignore the soy base here. It's not terribly relevant to our discussion. Sorry about the background there for a second. Turn it off. Mic off for a second. In Europe, again, near toddlers, as babies in the second 6 months of life, probably benefit from more iron than babies do in the first 6 months of life. Human milk is a very low iron source. After 6 months of life, much of the iron comes from solid foods. But the U.S. does not stage formulas ever by regulation. So the maximum is high and the routine level is high. Next slide, please. So who's right? Well, the evidence, in my opinion, supports the European, not the U.S. approach. The best study of this was done by Betsy Lazar's group. It was done in Chile. Adolescents received iron-fortified formula as infants from 6 to 12 months of age at the recommended levels in the U.S. had poor cognitive outcomes compared with those who received the low iron formula. Babies do not need, especially in the first 6 months of life, a lot of iron. They get it from their liver stores. They get it from a small amount from human milk. The fact that we've had levels of iron, the level of iron in infant formula was literally picked randomly. This is a complicated issue because WIC also mandates high levels of iron in formula. But the Europeans have laid out over the decades very clear evidence for why high iron may decrease growth, may cause worse cognitive outcomes, and may be a pro-inflammatory agent. This is one that should have been fixed a long time ago. Next slide. So some other issues related to new formulas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the equity issue. So what's the hot topic in formulas right now is releasing new formulas with bioactive products, what are called human milk oligosaccharides, maternal fat globule membrane, and other things. For the most part, most of these bioactive things are only found in formulas that are not marketed in the WIC program. WIC is about 51% of the formula market. Why? Because it's a competitive bidding market and the companies are not mandated to put them in the WIC formulas. Therefore, they don't in order to be able to win the bid and produce a lower cost formula. But this is problematic, obviously, from an equity perspective. If, in fact, we believe that human milk oligosaccharides should be in formulas, the babies should get it, then they should be in the formulas given in the WIC program too. Anything else is grossly unethical. So the FDA should mandate, well, it should evaluate whether or not human milk oligosaccharides and similar types of products should be in formulas. And if they decide that they should be in formulas, they should be mandated. And the WIC will have to deal with that. Many people, including those within the WIC community, don't agree with that. They feel that that would increase the cost of WIC formula and decrease the number of babies who are able to get WIC benefits. I would argue that selling a suboptimal formula to that 51% of the market is equally unethical, and that's a problem to be solved at the congressional and political level, not at the levels of babies not getting what might have a benefit from them. Next slide, please. So there's some new types of formulas out there, and I'd like to kind of take a quick tour through them because people are always asking about them. So our goat milk-based formulas safe. That's goat milk protein being used. So goat milk-based formula has been used in Europe for many years. They're also allowed in Australia and the Anapodian countries, Australia and New Zealand. Several recently imported infant formulas in the U.S. Use goat milk protein. Whether or not there's benefit is controversial. It's not obvious, but some families really like them. They do probably get digested a little bit faster than cow's milk, and that may have some benefits for some babies. There's absolutely no safety concerns whatsoever about their use in full-term infants. Many of you might know that goat milk is deficient in folate, but all the formulas are fully folate fortified. And we currently have 3 infant formulas in the U.S. that are goat milk protein based and registered with the FDA, 1 on permanent registration. The 2 are pending very soon upcoming permanent registration that can be used still under temporary registration permission. So that's an area parents ask about. I kind of like them. That doesn't mean everyone needs to use them, but it's certainly an option that's out there. Next slide, please. What about vegan protein formula? So if we look into the time up ahead, this has become a hot topic. The only currently available vegan formulas use soy protein, and many families, for all sorts of reasons, both valid and not valid, are afraid of or don't want to use soy protein. So other countries are beginning, and other places are beginning to produce formulas made from pea protein, rice protein. The registration and the marketing of these globally is up in the air. In some cases, are usable in Europe for special purposes, but they're coming. And they will need to be evaluated, which is one of the reasons why things like the PER study in animals is not a useful way to evaluate a vegan protein. So we do need to fix that as these formulas begin to be tested in the U.S. market and go through the FDA registration process. Next slide, please. What about organic and GMO free products? So European and some U.S. formulas often contain the organic designation, which is slightly different in Europe than the U.S., what the rules are. Keep in mind that organic dictates non-GMO. Non-GMO does not dictate organic. Toxic exposures can occur, that is heavy metals from any type of formula. There's no strong evidence that the risk of limited GMO exposure, which largely comes from the soy, is a problem, but some families may choose them. These designations do add cost to the formula. Again, families certainly have a right to choose them. They're not available in the WIC program. And the FDA needs to continuously work to establish standards for all infant formulas and deal with potentially toxic exposures. I'm not going to talk about heavy metal issues in formulas today. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this. But again, this is an area that the FDA is actively involved in. Next slide. A2 milk. A2 milk refers to milk from cows who naturally genetically make A2 casein protein. It's a single amino acid difference from A2 beta casein. It's said to be less toxic. The data in adults, in my opinion, are not compelling. The data in infants doesn't exist. It's probably not harmful, but there's no evidence of benefit. But you'll see it advertised a good bit. Next slide. See all these things that are coming out there. Few other variations of note and formula that are popping up on the marketplace. Postbiotics, clean label designation, using the whole cow milk fat. whether or not the source of DHA should be how they're purified. That's kind of a complicated issue. If you use organic formula, then it has to be cold pressed, whereas if you use non-organic formula, the DHA is hexane purified. There's negligibly and virtually unmeasurable levels of hexane that could end up in the final product. There's no known safety risk. But again, some families will choose organic because of that. There's an interesting issue about emulsification of formulas. The European formulas EFSA does not allow the use of emulsifiers, including carrageenan. The United States does use them. There's some interesting aspects of that debate, etc. So there's a lot of issues going on that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. All right. With that, I'm going to spend the last 4 or 5 minutes, for likely plenty of time for questions, and talk to you about Operation Stork Speed and what's going on with Operation Stork Speed. So in the spring, the Health and Human Services announced that they were interested in taking a thorough relook at infant formula. This came about in the form of statements by government officials, and then this publication that was from HHS. There are 6 different things that they stated that they wanted to do here. You can read them. Some of them are more important than others, but the priority issue is the first one, starting the nutrient review required by law, in the first comprehensive review since 1998. That's actually not entirely true. There's not been a comprehensive review since 1980. The reviews have been done since they've been not even close to comprehensive. So obviously we're 46 years behind and 45 years behind in doing that. So whatever else one might feel about some of the things that the government and HHS have done, we supported and have publicly supported the idea of this update. They've also been interested in the heavy metal issues, improving research, and things like communicating with consumers. Overall, this was not a terribly bad kind of statement, and this prompted something called an RFI about nutrients. Next slide. So what happens? So the federal government, not knowing entirely what to do about this, set up a meeting at the FDA on June 4th, 2025. I was pleased to present that. It was held at the FDA with a group of scientific experts in a somewhat unusual kind of approach, but it was what was done. Discussed a range of formula-related topics, including an RFI, request for information from the FDA, specific to nutrient intake. As the FDA put out a request in May, asking by September 11th, which occurred a week or so ago, whether or not the nutrient requirement should be changed, as we've talked about extensively, and how that should be done. That meeting, which was held at the FDA, and again, I was pleased, it has a video available. The link is there. If you have trouble downloading that link, if you Google it, you can find it. If not, you can email me. I can send it to you. The group of people whose names you see there on the manuscript list were the people that were there. We put together a series of manuscripts which cover the topic and are shown there. They're currently in preprint, going through the peer review process in the peer review journal now, but we did put them on the preprint server because they had to be submitted to the FDA by September 11th, and we needed to get them to the FDA for that RFI. So we put them on preprint server so that you can find them there as they get edited and get through the peer review process. At the meeting, we were only allowed 5 minutes or so to speak. So I created a 35-minute version of mostly what you just heard. But if you want a more detailed version, especially that covers a little bit more about the calcium issues and things like that, I put it on a YouTube channel for people that want to take a look at it. But the question then becomes truly what's next? And the answer is we don't entirely know. The FDA got a couple hundred comments on the RFI. Some of them were spammed. A company that produces toddler formula that doesn't use seed oil got a bunch of its followers to spam the RFI. But essentially, to the best of my knowledge, every infant formula company put something in commentary. Many public interest groups put commentary in, including groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Society for Nutrition, etc. And so the FDA has to take a look at those. And then the FDA will have to go through a regulatory process to determine how they're going to go forward and what they're going to put before the public in the regulatory process about changes that might occur. Next slide. So I'm going to conclude with two slides. This is the first one, and the next one is the fun one. Are European formulas better than American ones? Parents ask. It's a confused question, first of all. All formulas are global, with raw materials sourced globally, such as vitamin premix. The U.S. currently imports many formulas that are fully registered, that is, it's quite legal and appropriate to use them, produced in Europe as well as Australia and New Zealand. Standards can be different, labeling can be different. Characteristics sought by some families that are found in formulas made in Europe are often found in some of the newer formulas made in the United States. There isn't anything special that you can't obtain via FDA registered formula from both the US and other countries. The use of non-US FDA registered formula, which for an individual use is technically legal since the shortages, should be discouraged. If there's anything a parent can look for that can be found in the ones that you can find on the store shelves that are brought in via the FDA processes. And last slide. Now, this slide, there's some words there. Ignore all the words. The only reason for this slide is to look at the pictures of my 8 grandchildren. Okay, so I hope you'll appreciate 3 of them are born within the twins, and then the singleton that's in my arms there up in the top were born within the last 6 weeks. Whoever sent a heart through, keep doing it. You can send 285 hearts through, but in any case. And then the oldest are 2.5. So we have 8 grandchildren and a 9th one coming. And forget about anything else that's on the formula, but I just have to show my grandchildren to you. And with that, it's 11:41 by design. I'd like to speak about 40 minutes, so we have time for lots and lots of questions. You can ask anything you want about formula and about the formulas. I would make a conclusion that I particularly did not talk much about breast milk, and that's because this is a formula talk, and sometimes it's important to educate people about formula. Breast milk is superior to formula, but 80 to 90% of babies in the United States do receive formula at some point, and it's important to educate people on formula as well as breastfeeding. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Holscher and let her take over.
Thanks, Dr. Abrams. That was great. So if people could put their questions in the Q&A, I have a few to start with, and we can go from there. I do have to say that seeing your grandkids shows you have not only a lot of academic knowledge and scientific knowledge, but you also have a lot of practical knowledge too. So,
well, I can't tell you that I've learned a lot about feeding babies from watching my children and stepchildren do it. And I get going on some rants about the way we feed toddlers and the pouches, but that's not today's topic. Another time I can do a talk for you and do an extended rant about the toddler pouches, but that's not today.
we might have to do that. And I definitely would like to hear that. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A rather than raise your hands if you don't mind. So I have a quick question for you, because I know you mentioned bioactives, but you might want to define them a little bit more for the audience.
So I usually kind of turn that over to my friend Lars Bowden, and Sharon Donovan and the like, for those of you who want to read. There's some wonderful reviews. As we see it, bioactives are the non-primary nutrient sources not related to growth, but may have immunological benefits and other types of health benefits. In the practical sense, the original kind of the OG bioactive that was DHA. Now we're looking, most people when they talk about bioactives are talking about what are called human milk oligosaccharides, which are oligosaccharides that are uniquely found. There are hundreds of them found in human milk. Including some at fairly high concentrations, which are believed to have immune functions and other types of overall health benefits. And then some also consider some other components of milk fat, such as maternal fat globule membrane, to be bioactive. So all of these are not covered in the Infant Formula Act of 1980. None of them were. And most of them are not even covered necessarily from other regulatory processes involved in infant formula.
Great. Thank you. So here's a question from the audience. Why do you think the higher iron level issue has not been addressed in the United States?
Because we've been American Academy of Pediatrics and other groups have been very concerned about iron deficiency in our population. We remain a country, and now the end senior people have looked at this, about 10 to 15% of toddlers in the United States remain iron deficient, even in the current era. There's a lot of reasons for it. That gets my pouch thing. But there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. And so when they set the guidance, people aimed high, and people have been very nervous. People are concerned, well, what happens if a mom dilutes formula, etc. But the level in U.S. formula, so I'm not suggesting we bring it down by more than about a third below what it currently is now, which is still, no, I think we should bring it down to the level that's at the high end of what the Europeans allow. But right now we're so out of line with all of the current science. But the reason has been, and there's still groups that resist the idea because they have this perception. But formula-fed babies, generally speaking, are not the high risk for getting iron deficient. It's the breastfed babies who are not getting adequate iron from solid foods in the second 6 months of life that we're still seeing a lot of population. So that's a historical reason. There's just been a hesitation. Every time the FDA's looked at it, they've just been afraid, despite what the Europeans have done, to pull the plug. I think we're going to get them this time. I think I think we have a lot of different people and a lot of science suggesting that the iron levels need to be brought down. It's counterintuitive to people's thinking about iron, that you need to bring it down. The idea of iron that's toxic is a very difficult idea for many people.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So here's another question from the audience. Has Europe updated its standards for formula ingredients more recently than the US?
Well, if you consider 2014 more recently than 1980, they have. So the last major, so Europe tends to do continuous guidance. The U.S. kind of says they do, but doesn't really do it. The last major revision of this, so if you're Googling it, trying to find the European guidance, it's all out there published in documents. They're hundreds of pages long. The iron issue, I think, is like 100 pages in one document of every study that's ever been done in the history of the galaxy. They were last published in 2014.
Thanks. So another comment, another question. Well, it's a comment and a question. First, your grandkids are adorable.
Thank
And
you.
then second is please comment on if Operation Stork Speed will also be applicable to human milk fortifiers used in preterm and very low birth weight babies.
So at the FDA panel, there was a little bit of discussion of those kind of issues, including things like probiotics in preterm infants, which is a huge controversy. But honestly, the way it was described by the HHS, I think the focus initially will be on full-term infants and outside the NICU setting. We have told the FDA that we need a complete evaluation of NICU issues because it's desperate. As a neonatologist, I'm well aware how much that's needed. I don't think that the initial phase of this will cover that territory. I think right now the focus is going to be on full-term infants.
Great. So thank you for a great summary. One area that hasn't been highlighted by OSS is the ethical aspects of conducting IF trials. In most trials, study formula is provided without cost, and sometimes recruitment is very early when the decision not to breastfeed may not be fully established. In some trials, investigators demand minimum daily formula consumption for participants throughout the trial. How can we ensure conduct is ethical and full or partial breastfeeding or breast milk feeding are protected in participants, potential study participants? So you touched on that a bit.
Yeah, but let me talk a little bit about it. It's obviously a really important issue. And in fact, it's an issue both in terms of trying to evaluate new formulas because the FDA guidance is almost impossible to ethically, implement based on that. It's also a practical issue because most of our babies who are formula fed will have been fed breast milk for a while. Mothers might choose to go back to work, but many of them are not off of breast milk by 2 weeks of age. And the other issue is because many of our formula fed mothers are on the WIC program and they're getting it for free, it's hard to incentivize them. And then we always are afraid if people then say, okay, we're not going to do the studies in the United States, we're going to go to a lower middle income country. As is obvious, the incentivization issues would be even more problematic. So all of that means that we need to take a very close look at who we put in these studies. At the simplest end, if we would simply delay the entry time and shorten the length of time in which we need to monitor growth, a lot of those ethical issues would be improved at least, because babies would have a longer time which they could be on breast milk. But it is a problem. And again, we do need to do clinical testing on formulas. No one would want a formula to be on the market that no baby had ever had it tested on. But it is a tremendous challenge to find a way to enroll babies only those whose mothers have truly naturally chosen to use a formula, who can still be incentivized ethically and to do it. So there's no simple way, but the current rules disincentivize doing them in an ethical way, in my opinion, and that's a real issue, and we're well aware of it.
So here's another question. What are your thoughts on the financial disclosures and conflict of interest expressed by your co-authors on the three-part comment provided by the FDA expert panel for Operation Stork Speed? Do you agree that this is a major issue in the U.S. with infant formula or nutrition lobbying groups, and could it be addressed by adopting elements of the WHO code?
Well, there's about six questions all wrapped up in there.
Yeah.
Let me say this. The problem broadly is that the vast majority of people who work in this field have at some point in time consulted for, worked for, been involved in the infant formula industry. That's how they got their funding. That's how they got started. They're in a whole lot of money for formula research. And over the decades, I've consulted, given talks for formula companies too. When I became chair of the Committee on Nutrition, the AAP, I brought that way down. And then over the last several years, I've completely stopped. So that's why I don't have anything that meets within the conflict of interest time period that we're involved in here. Because in order to be able to do this in a non-conflicted fashion, I've chosen not to do it, but not everyone can make that decision. I'm old, I'm not running a lab, I don't need to go and get lab funding, so it's a problem. I think as always, conflicts of interest are best disclosed and then recognized and dealt with, rather than saying, if one says that the only people that can present in this situation are those that have not in the last 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, done any work with a relevant company, then you're going to be choosing people that are not really terribly involved in the field in the most part. So it is a challenge. And I think we recognize it, and I think everyone has to kind of take a look at those statements. My own personal opinion is that for the most part, the FDA panel was not seriously compromised by that issue, but other people can feel separately. The code itself is a talk all in and of itself. Just for those who don't know the history, in 1980, the World Health Organization passed a code of marketing of infant formulas. The U.S. was the only country in the world that voted no. The U.S. implements no aspect of the code, which is why you can call formulas pretty much whatever you want. I believe that there are baby-friendly hospitals implement parts of the code. There's all sorts of different issues of that. Bottom line is that this issue needs to be addressed. I'm not sure that the full code as it existed in the 1980 version is ever going to be adopted in the United States, but there's certainly some aspects, especially about marketing. And the FDA panel did spend a lot of time talking about misleading marketing. So I think that we can begin with that issue.
Yeah, I think the nutrition funding question is always interesting one to talk about, because there isn't as much funding as we would like for nutrition research through NIH or what we'd see as other non-biased groups.
Right.
So that really needs to be improved.
By the way, Stork Speed specifically includes a component to look at NIH funding for this type of research. It's specifically in the Stork Speed description by the FDA and HHS.
Good point. So here's another question. Did Operation Stork Speed address potential bacterial contamination in formula cans?
No, not really. That actually is largely addressed by the previous NASM panel that I did, and the FDA is working on that I didn't talk about today because I can only talk about so much. Stork Speed itself does include issues of contamination related to heavy metals and other toxic components. Bacterial contamination is, I won't say it wasn't covered at all. There were a few comments about it, but that's mostly probably going to be covered by some manufacturing issues, mostly covered by some other aspects. Now, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be covered, but I don't expect it to be the lead issue in this. I think that's been covered elsewhere largely.
Yeah. So I've got two questions about reduced lactose formulas.
Okay.
So one are, why are families more drawn to that? And what are common cases where a baby might be taking reduced lactose formulas but might not necessarily need it?
So the way in which it practically occurs, and I say this as somebody who's a pediatrician who literally works in a newborn nursery, taking care of newborn babies and talking to families about it. So this is this is about direct knowledge as you can get. I mean, I do this on a regular basis. This is not theoretical knowledge. This is actual talking to families knowledge, which has its own benefit. What happens is babies in the first 48 hours, 72 hours of life often have some symptomatology. They spit, they cough, they cry, they do all sorts of things that parents don't like. Sometimes they're being breastfed and the breast milk hasn't come in. There's a natural tendency to want to deal with this by finding a formula that somebody thinks, a doctor, a nurse, whoever, a family member thinks is better. Many of the families have babies where an older child was put on a low lactose formula early on. And some of it's just when the pediatrician gets called and gets frustrated, they say, well, what the heck? Try this formula that has a cool name and it'll do better. So it's a little bit of placebo effect. So all of those things are at play, and many others. WIC allows the low lactose formulas as a free substitution in most, if not all, states. So it's not they're not the full hydrolysates, the complete protein hydrolysates are not routine. You have to get special permission, but you can switch out the low lactose formula. I assume in every state, but certainly including especially in Texas and probably most, if not all, states. So it's an easy change to make, even for the WIC families, and it has a powerful placebo effect.
Right. And a related question is, what does the study about higher weight gain and lower lactose formulas give for possible reasons for this?
Well, again, the people that do that, and I'm not a researcher in this area, so I would defer. They've written a good bit about it. Dr. Royan's people have written a lot, so it's out there about it. They believe that there's an increase. It's kind of like taking pure sugar. That is, if they an increase in the insulin responses and things of that sort that actually cause. They also believe that there's a change in the microbiome that's associated with avoiding lactose. I think that those experts can kind of go through some of what they believe are the mechanism a little bit better. None of it is well proven, but the real issue is, are parents being told to make a change or being convinced or otherwise making a change in formula that's a true placebo effect that may have a negative consequence rather than simply dealing with the actual problem the baby has, which is that all babies spit.
So, one question that you didn't necessarily address, but what is what do you think about the use of homemade formulas? Because I know they're promoted a lot on the internet.
So I think I've written a few hundred things that basically say don't do it. Um, when the shortages occurred and people went to homemade formulas, we saw hospitalizations related to it. The problem is that when people publish online a recipe, not only are there infectious concerns, which we haven't talked about, but the bioavailability of the nutrients isn't high. So what happens, calcium in particular is a huge problem. You can't just throw any form of calcium. The pH of the baby's stomach is much higher than it is in the adult stomach. They don't absorb the calcium. As a simple example, there's many other issues that are involved in that. So we really strongly discourage it. It's not safe. And this became a big issue in 2022. It seems to have died down a little bit. But one of the pieces that, many of the families that are in that kind of an alternative approach and don't really like what the mainstream companies are doing, many of them are interested in some of these novel formulas, vegan formulas, and different things on the market. So that's one of the reasons why it really is important that we get these types of novel protein, novel sources that might appeal to some people through the regulatory process. It's not like we have the formula everybody needs. Okay, we're done for the day. Because people have different opinions about what they want. And then as long as it's safe, they ought to have the option of buying it.
Thank you.
All right.
So we're right to the end of time. So there are a few other questions that we will forward to Dr. Abrams. But a couple of ending slides. I wanted to make sure the next slide shows about continuing education. So just to remind you, this is eligible for nursing CEUs, our CHES, MCHES credit, our RD or RDN CPEUs. So there is, I'm going to leave it there a little bit, the QR code if you need the link to the evaluation for the nursing CEUs. And I just wanted to also let you know that the recording and slides will be distributed after the session is done. And we also we'll be posting it on our website at msdcenter.org.
Can I make a comment, Dean, about using the
Sure.
slides? You're welcome to use them with attribution. Keep in mind, my opinion today may not be my opinion tomorrow. And so I really do update this talk almost every week because the sort of situation changes constantly in the day. So use with caution. You're welcome to use with attribution, but use with great caution because this is my opinion today. It may not be my opinion when you use it next week.
I think that's a smart thing to kind of emphasize too, because in the field of nutrition and health and medicine, things are changing all the time. So, and especially in a field like this, where there's so much interest and ongoing.
And then, Deanna, of course, please don't use the grandchildren picture.
Yeah, don't use the grandkids. Thanks. And then the next slide is just the QR code to view past webinars and then to register for upcoming ones. So we do have a upcoming webinar on Tuesday, the 23rd at 12 noon. It's going to be on culinary medicine with Dr. Jacqueline Albin from UT Southwestern, who was a resident for Dr. Abrams. So excited to have her on as well. All right. Thank y'all. Have a good rest of today, and we'll see you at another webinar. Bye, everyone.
I have to go to another call.